topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
What's working on purpose anyway? Each week, we ponder the answer to this question. People ache for meaning and purpose at work, to contribute their talents passionately and know their lives really matter. They crave being part of an organization that inspires them and helps them grow into realizing their highest potential. Business can be such a force for good in the world, elevating humanity. In our program, we provide guidance and inspiration to help usher in this world we all want, working on purpose. Now, here's your host, Dr. Elise Cortez.
Welcome back to the Working on Purpose program, which has been brought to you with passion and pride since February of 2015. Thanks for tuning in again this week. Great to have you. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. If we've not met before and you don't know me, I'm a workforce advisor, organizational psychologist, management consultant, logotherapist, speaker, and author. My team and I at Gusto now help companies to enliven and fortify their operations by building a dynamic, high-performance culture, inspirational leadership, and nurturing managers elevated by activating meaning and purpose. And did you know that inspired employees actually outperform their satisfied peers by a factor of 2.25 to 1? In other words, inspiration is pretty good for the bottom line. You can learn more about us and how we can work together at gusto-now.com or my personal site, elisecortez.com. Getting in today's program, we have with us Marilyn Vetter, who is the CEO of Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever, where her professional and personal worlds combine. Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever is the nation's leading organization committed to conserving upland birds and wildlife through habitat improvement. Her professional background also includes 30 years of strategic leadership, business management, and political advocacy in the biopharmaceutical sector. We'll be talking today about the roots of a toxic culture, the role of leadership in culture, and creating cultures that elevate people. She joins us today from St. Paul, Minnesota. Marilyn, welcome to Working on Purpose.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm excited about our conversation.
I am too. I really want to harvest and be able to share all these years of experience that you've had being able to steward culture, and you've seen the good, bad, and the ugly, of course, in that time. So I want to also just give a shout out to Hope Mueller and Jennifer Pesticas, who brought us together, because I got to MC the Thrive in 25 conference. You were also a speaker there. And that's where this great idea to have you on came to be. So thanks for all of that great energy to bring you to us.
Absolutely. Those two ladies are very inspiring and doing so much in the workplace. And I love the fact that you started with the statistics about inspirational work, and that it doesn't just feel good, it does good.
Right. I love that. Thank you for saying that. That's great. Well, let's hear, since the listeners and viewers don't know you as I do, let's just hear a little bit about your background before you got into what you're doing today. And why are you so passionate about what you're doing today?
So I have, as you said, been in the workforce for a little over 30 years. And my background it's kind of a convoluted web. I started in broadcasting and ended up in pharmaceutical sales, and then ended up in lobbying. And in the meantime, in this undercurrent in my whole life, I had this very strong background in volunteering. It's something that our parents established with us very, very early on, is that you should always give back and not just take. And so while I did that, I ended up on several boards, and one of them led me to being on the Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever board. And I got to witness an organization that I was incredibly passionate about as a member, and then got to be so much more involved in it. And I got to see how the work that they're doing is enriching the environment so much more than what people think it is. Our name tends to limit people to what it thinks we do, when honestly what we're working on is wild places that more people can experience. So when the position for the CEO role came open, I thought this is a great opportunity for me to expose the team here, who is an amazing team, very, very passionate, to what a culture can bring them. And I've, as you said, had good, bad, and ugly. I've been in cultures where it was warm and wonderful. And I felt supported and cared for and heard and valued. And then there's been cultures where I felt like I was a widget and a number and I didn't fit in. But there are so many active things that we can do to enrich a culture and build a culture that this was a perfect opportunity for me to bring what I've learned to a nonprofit sector that oftentimes I think we take people for granted in nonprofits because they're doing work that they love, that they shouldn't have to also work in an environment that makes them feel as important as the mission. And that's why I was super excited to be able to have the opportunity and honored to be part of this team.
Oh, that's amazing, Marilyn. Really appreciate that. Your passion really comes through, and I love that, because really passion is a conveyance of energy. I do want to talk about what you have been doing at the organization. We're going to save that for the third segment when we talk about how we actually elevate people. So we're going to talk about the work that you've done there as well. But first, what I want to do for this part of our conversation is help our listeners and viewers understand how they might start to recognize when an organization's culture has actually gone toxic. First, what's toxic, and how do we start to recognize that, we're in that kind of a stew?
I think the first hallmark of what toxic feels like is when, as a participant in that culture, an employee in a team, where you no longer feel like you can make a difference or want to make a difference. When you've become apathetic to the organization and feel like it's hopeless, that I can't make a change, people start avoiding their own personal responsibility, and that is the death knell of any organization. When people don't feel like they can make a difference, they will stop making a difference. And I think the number one way you see that present itself is when everything goes underground. People stop being candid. They stop feeling like it matters. So they don't bring up their voice. They don't bring up their issues. And once it goes underground, you've really lost the opportunity to make shifts. So you have to be able to be open and honest and candid with each other. And once you've lost that, you know that something big has to happen. Something big has to intervene, because it really is the root of all things. We're going to talk about that probably later, about trust. And when people feel like they no longer can trust to take risks, they stop innovating, they stop being creative, and they honestly go silent. And when we talked a lot about quiet quitting during COVID, I think it's because people felt like this loss of connection, and that they did, because they lost connection, felt like they were no longer connected to the mission and the organization. You have to create connectivity, whether it's remote or not. And an organization should want feedback, should do surveys, should ask for the hard things, because once you do hard things, you all get better.
Yeah, that's gorgeous. One of the things that I know, because of the work that I get to do when I go into organizations where I get the privilege of helping them to steward their culture, and really what I love doing is helping to activate the meaning and purpose, which I think is what you've also done. We'll get to that later. But one thing that I recognize right out of the gate is I get the benefit as a third party coming from the outside of seeing some of those hidden or limiting beliefs that are governing the organization. The people inside it, the leaders themselves, the people that are running the organization, are not aware of these beliefs. So could you talk a bit about how limiting beliefs at either the individual level and the organizational level can contribute to creating toxic dynamics?
Curiosity for me is as a huge driver. And I think that's in all things, not just about learning things, but about how can we better our team? How can we better our organization? How can we better how we deliver to our customers? And when we start to limit and we say that this is how work will be done, it stifles people's personal investment in it. It also makes them feel incredibly marginalized. We all have opinions. We all have ideas. And when people can't voice those things, when they can't come up with solutions, they stop looking for solutions. And that's when the organization loses. I think that the most important thing that leaders can do is be curious and open and vulnerable. And all of those things do not fit in limiting organizations.
What you were speaking to there, when you direct people to this is how to do the work. And there's one particular word in my space, the organizational psychology space, that you're speaking to, and that's autonomy. And we know what a strong driver autonomy is for people. I have often been just gobsmacked that if I just say, we want to get here, however you get there, I don't care. Let's see what you come up with. They well surpass what it is we're trying to get to with their creativity. So limiting that is just I love your word earlier, death knell. Okay, so now one thing that I find interesting, and I was just working with a company in February where they were trying to see what was under the hood with their culture. I was surprised how advanced the toxicity had gotten in the organization, and the leaders weren't recognizing it. They still couldn't see it. So why do you think leaders often fail to recognize toxicity when they're in the middle of it, or likely the ones that are championing it?
It's fascinating. Part of it is that lack of awareness. Sometimes it's fear. People don't want to admit that there are things that could be going better, which we absolutely have to face that. If we can't face our weaknesses, we will never conquer our weaknesses. And I think that's oftentimes one of the things that I see in leaders, particularly mid-stage leaders. Once you've arrived at that executive level, a lot of times people feel like they have conquered enough issues that they feel confident. But when people are at mid-stage or they have lots of folks above them, they tend to be very self-limiting in about how they attach themselves to success. And as leaders, we get hyper-focused on metrics, and we get so focused on metrics that we think that's the only measure of performance. But if our employees aren't engaged, if they don't feel like they are part of the organization or part of the success of the organization, then we've missed the best opportunities to get the best out of our teams. And, I think most people want to do the right things, but they get so focused on delivering, whether it's a quarterly earnings report or the year-end metrics, that they forget that there's so much more to the story than that. And people start designing workarounds. And I think the other thing that I find is that people are so averse to conflict. They will do almost anything to avoid it. And I find it fascinating. And I suppose I was probably guilty of that in my earlier stages too. And now I actually relish those opportunities where I'm having a one-on-one with someone to say, there is an opportunity for you to be better here. How can we address that? When we avoid conflict, we stymie people's growth. Because if we're not honest with them, how will they ever know? It's called blind spots for a reason.
Right.
And if we don't address them, then everything starts to go underground. People don't feel supported. They don't feel like they have an honest, trustworthy leader above them. And so I think sometimes leaders get so wrapped in either the metrics or protecting themselves that they're afraid to be vulnerable. And when we aren't vulnerable, then we're full of bravado. And that is, we're just not being honest with ourselves then.
I really appreciate the depth of your perspective on that. That's really, really fascinating. And it makes me also think about what happens in organizations especially when you have a large organization, you've got lots of different verticals. And those different verticals have things that they're being measured for that are maybe different than, their neighbors. And it does create a sense of competition or sometimes there's mismatch alignment between what this part of the organization is doing with this one. How do you see that playing into the space of eroding a culture, and what can we do about that?
Oh, Elise, you nailed it. I think the hardest thread to weave in any organization is the horizontal one. It's really, really easy to build vertical silos, and you can create all kinds of metrics. And then at the end of the year, you wonder why, well, so-and-so is working on the same thing that I'm working on, or they're worse, they're working on something that's the antithesis of what I'm working on.
Yes.
And we wonder how it happened. So first of all, people have to understand that sometimes you have to slow down to speed up. That means we have to find out what our neighbors are doing. We have to find out what it is that they're doing that I could benefit them and how they can benefit me. And that takes a ton of intention. And I think people get impatient with that. So I think breaking down those silos is super important. And there's really intentional ways to do that. You create goals that require collaboration, that are goals that are across maybe 2 or 3 teams, so that the metrics are much larger and that they actually impact those teams. It drives performance, which then becomes cultural. It becomes habitual. So sometimes when you come into an organization and the verticals are very established, you almost have to force it in the beginning through goal development and work plans and really taking it down to the nth degree. And then when people get to experience the wins, it becomes habitual, which then impacts the culture.
Yeah, and those wins are euphoric, right? When we can create that shared sense of winning is, nothing better than a team win, right?
Absolutely.
With that energy, let's take our first break. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. We've been on air with Marilyn Vetter, the CEO of Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever, the nation's leading organization committed to conserving upland birds and wildlife through habitat improvement. We've been talking in this first segment about her experience of recognizing the roots of toxicity in a culture. When we come back from our break, we'll talk about the role of leadership in culture. We'll be right back.
Dr. Elise Cortez is a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose, an inspirational speaker and author. She helps companies visioneer for greater purpose among stakeholders and develop purpose-inspired leadership and meaning-infused cultures that elevate fulfillment, performance, and commitment within the workforce. To learn more or to invite Elise to speak to your organization, please visit her at elisecortez.com. Let's talk about how to get your employees working on purpose. This is Working on Purpose with Dr. Elise Cortez. To reach our program today or to open a conversation with Elise, send an email to Elise, A-L-I-S-E, at elisecortez.com. Now, back to Working on Purpose.
Thanks for staying with us and welcome back to Working on Purpose. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez, as I am dedicated to helping create a world where organizations thrive because their people thrive, and they're led by inspirational leaders that help them find and contribute their greatness. And we do business that betters the world. I keep researching and writing my own books. So one of the latest came out. It's called The Great Revitalization, How Activating Meaning and Purpose Can Radically Enliven Your Business. And I wrote it to help leaders understand today's diverse and discerning workforce. What do they want and need to be able to give their best and stick around with you? And then I offer 22 best practices to help you do that for them. You can find my books on Amazon or my personal site, elisecortez.com. If you are just now joining us, my guest is Marilyn Vetter. She is the CEO of Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever. So now for this segment, I want to talk specifically about the actual leadership role in culture. There's so much we can do. And I really like first, and I want to emphasize what you've been saying about how critical it is to be intentional about your culture. And one thing that I have found really, really interesting, and I love working with leaders, Marilyn, I love working with C-suite leaders, senior level leaders. And I also recognize you mentioned something earlier about how vulnerable that it can be to be in those roles. It is a hard job to be at the top of an organization. And I do believe they need help. And what I also have come to understand is, a culture can only evolve to the level of wherever the leader has evolved. So if you could speak a little bit about what that looks like from your vantage point, your experience, how do we know that, that this is what when we see the culture, how do we know, that's a reflection of where the leader is?
So culture it's led by leaders at the top, but it has to, of course, owned by everyone. But if your leaders haven't done their own work and identified their own strengths and weaknesses, then you're really going to topple over. One of the things that I think is important for people to understand is we can't expect people on our teams to travel further on their journeys than we've traveled on our own. Mm-hmm. And I absolutely believe that everybody should do work, whether it's a coach or it's a therapist, whatever that is. You need to know what your drivers are that make you be your best. And let's admit it, when we're our worst. And if you haven't figured those things out, then sometimes that outside person as a coach can be the absolute best way for you to do that. You have to be able to model what that looks like to a team. And you can't model it if you don't know what your drivers are. And, oftentimes, and you, of course, probably see this all the time, is that so much of what we experience is fear-based. And that people are afraid to fail. They're afraid to be enough. And when we work through fear that is a terrible driver of performance for anyone on the team. And when our leaders can instead model vulnerability and curiosity, they will absolutely inspire others to do their own work as well.
I really appreciate that, and of course applaud that. I am a lifelong learner. Part of the reason I continue to host this podcast, Marilyn, after 10 and a half years is because it helps catalyze my own ongoing learning and development. And I personally always have two coaches that I work with continually. So I believe that to be effective in today's times, that you need to do that as well. Anybody that's in a leadership role must do that, even if you're in an individual contributing role. So my question for you then is, how can we, or how have you helped executives to, especially in the C-suite and the senior levels, realize the importance of their own ongoing development? How do you help them get present to that?
Actually, where I'm at right now is such a good story about that. Nonprofit oftentimes don't have the funds to invest in leadership development. And when I came here 2.5 years ago, one of the very first things I asked, well, when was the last time the leadership team was through a 360? And most of them had not experienced that. And when you haven't had a 360, well, you've never been exposed to your blind spots then, because maybe your boss can identify it, but maybe not. And maybe they can coach you through it, and maybe not. And so the first thing that I recommend for anyone, whether you're an individual contributor or whether you're leading teams or you're leading a company, you should have 360 feedback routinely, at least every 18 to 24 months, I believe. Because as you work on one thing that you learn in it, you might then next time find out you either over triangulated or something else has popped up and said. And my personal favorite is Leadership Circle Profile, because it doesn't just measure, it doesn't just give you numeric ratings. It gives people the opportunity to actually write in dialogue. And those have been some of our leaders' biggest aha moments. Like, I had no idea that I was showing up that way to others. Right. And that is oftentimes the best way to inspire leaders that you think aren't going to make it to transform how they work. It's been absolutely transformational to this leadership team.
I so appreciate what you're saying. In fact, I can tell you this, just you, Marilyn, not anybody else listening, right? Just you, that I have over the years worked with several senior level leaders who were, of course, asked for feedback for their leader, very high level leader. And of course, they were scared and remiss and didn't really want to be honest. And I really helped coach them, or have helped coach them over the years, to articulate really how their leader, what they appreciate about their leader, and how their behaviors or communication limit their contribution or impede what we're trying to do. And so often what I understand is that senior leaders especially really miss getting crucial feedback because people are afraid to give it to them. And then it's a disservice to them. It's a disservice to the senior level leader that doesn't get the benefit of that real, unfiltered feedback that is designed to really help them. So I really appreciate what you're saying, and then of course you got to make it safe. Once they give you the feedback, you can't come after them and say, who the hell gave me this feedback? Where are they? I think it was so-and-so, right?
One of the things that I love about the fact that you bring so much experience from the coaching perspective, I never allow 360 feedback to be given in an organization without coach support.
That's great. That's great.
It is so hard to sometimes hear that feedback and find ways to then transform those learnings into wins.
Yeah.
And you have to have someone that's not emotionally invested in you, or you're certainly invested in your success, but not invested in your role. They are invested in you. And that's where sometimes just 2 to 3 coaching sessions for every time somebody goes through it helps them turn those learnings into work plans and their own individual development plans. And I honestly think it's a disservice to people to give them feedback without a coach to help them decipher it.
I completely agree, of course. And I also want to recognize that, feedback can really, really sting and even really hurt. Let's not overlook that. And it's the only way to grow. I mean, if you don't want to go through life, keep repeating the same, issues and problems and setbacks over and over again, if we could just somehow summon a little bit of courage to be able to, listen and be open to that feedback, the difference it can make. What I love the most, Marilyn, is when I'm working with senior level leaders for some period of time and their spouse reaches out to me and says, thank you. I don't know what's going on, but things are already better at home, right? We know because it cascades.
You are so right. I had a gentleman on one of my previous teams that his wife reached out to me and said, I'm guessing he's a better colleague, but I can tell you he's a hell of a lot better husband than he was before. And I think the other thing that's really important too is when teams can do these things together.
Yes.
It helps bring them together. You're building, and even just is build a common vernacular. You're building common tools throughout the organization that people can resonate with. And it helps them build accountability partners internally of, if you've been through this and I'm going through this, what did you learn from it? It's an extraordinary tool. I'm not going to lie, it's a big investment, but it's the best investment we've made.
I completely agree. And I'll tell you, from the vantage point of, being on the serving part of those kinds of deals, it's incredibly fulfilling to be able to see it, to watch a team literally grow together, watch their molecules change and elevate together. It is amazing. Some of the best things that I get to do in my work, for sure. We're still talking about the role of leadership and culture. So now what I want to get to is what happens when a leader defers the idea of stewarding culture just to HR's responsibility.
Oh, that's such a cop-out. It is. We hear it all the time.
Be direct, Marilyn. Right. Be direct.
People do it all the time. And I'm so glad you asked the question, because HR might help mold what that looks like and how it's done inside an organization, but they don't own what the culture is. We all own what the culture is. So maybe I'll give you an idea of how we tackled it. First of all, I think there's lots of tools that are used by HR for us to help as an organization build that. That's engagement and surveys amongst our teams that then helps those leaders figure out how they're doing on their team and how they can improve themselves. That then tells them that HR can't own this. They might own the results, but as leaders, we have to own the work of how we transform those cultures. So whether it's through surveys, whether it's through a culture working group, which we defined after we got our most recent survey results, and they were really great and powerful, but they showed us gaps that we had. And well, if HR just says, well, I'm going to create a solution, they might get the wrong solution. So you have to have people involved in all layers of the organization in that process of not only identifying the gaps, but what are those solutions? And they've come forward with incredible solutions that we probably wouldn't have thought of because a lot of people said, well, I don't get enough time and money invested in my career. So people thought right away, oh, this is going to get expensive. And what they really asked for was internal mentors and leaders and career ladders. Those are not expensive things for us to invest in, but it isn't what they asked for. But HR can't be the only one that owns it. They just happen to, maybe they own the center of the spoke, but the rest of us have to be the spokes on the wheel.
I got to say two things to that beautiful share, Marilyn. One is I fundamentally believe to my core, so I set this question up intentionally, is that culture has to be driven by the top leadership. And so HR is your partner and collaborator, but they are certainly not the one that's running in the culture train. They can help that along, but I like what you said, give tools and such to be able to support it and steward it. The second thing I want to say to what you just shared there is how critical it is that I love that you're doing this at your organization, that when you do a survey, an engagement survey or whatever, that you share those results back to the people who gave you the information. So 100%. Many organizations don't want to do that because they don't like the vulnerability of that. There's things in here that people don't like. I don't want to share this. But when you share it, you reflect back to the organization, we listened to you, we heard you, here's what we got from you. And then when you share that back, the team ought to go, oh yeah, that's what we said, they heard us. And then I love the idea, and I want to celebrate that you're involving your team to be able to address the gaps. Then they own it, they're part of it, right? And to your point, they'll have ideas that maybe don't cost any money at all, And it would take you further to address those gaps in whatever you came up with in the leadership circle.
And, one of the things that we did actually going forward was we designed a workforce health metric that is a combination of turnover and our engagement results that we report to our board on every scorecard that we give them. And we hold ourselves as executives in the organization accountable as part of our own review process and our bonus process of if we're going to be committed to growing and building this culture, we all have to be part of that. And if nothing else, that will always remind people of what their role is in this.
I don't really want to let you go at the end of the show, just so you know. We could keep this going for quite some time. The last question I wanted to serve up for this part of our conversation about the role of leadership and culture. I'm sure from your 30 plus years of experience that you have some kind of a story or an example that you can share of how leadership transformation unlocked or elevated cultural change in the direction in which they were trying to get to.
I actually do, and it's from this team, and we've hit on some of the high points. So this team had not had an opportunity to work on themselves and work on the organization. So by having them have the opportunity for 360, for them to work on themselves, then build this common nomenclature that they get to work with. Now we get to work on teams, and then we get to work on bigger things like culture and focus. And so we undertook, so then we went, all right, so our mission and our vision, we reiterated, are they still the same? Yes, we are. Our mission, what we do, our vision, how does that look? Our strategic plan, what does that look like? How did we get that work done? And then we agreed, we all got together on our one big thing, when we call it our OBT, which I'm going to read to you, that we committed to together: achieve and celebrate ambitious mission outcomes by investing in cross-functional relationships, bold goal setting, and a collaborative culture. And they all created that together.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I am totally with you on that. In fact, I want to comment more on that. But I want to go, let's get our last break, because I really celebrate and also applaud and do something similar when I'm working with other teams. So let's let our listeners and viewers take that in and celebrate that for themselves and consider how they might do that in their own teams while we take our second break. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. We've been on air with Marilyn Vetter, who's the CEO of Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever. We've been talking a bit about the role of leadership in culture. When we come back, we're going to talk about building cultures that elevate people, the way she's done at her organization today. We'll be right back.
Dr. Elise Cortez is a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose, an inspirational speaker and author. She helps companies visioneer for greater purpose among stakeholders and develop purpose-inspired leadership and meaning-infused cultures that elevate fulfillment, performance, and commitment within the workforce. To learn more or to invite Elise to speak to your organization, please visit her at elisecortez.com. Let's talk about how to get your employees working on purpose. This is Working on Purpose with Dr. Elise Cortez. To reach our program today or to open a conversation with Elise, send an email to Elise, A-L-I-S-E, at elisecortez.com. Now, back to Working on Purpose.
Thanks for staying with us and welcome back to Working on Purpose. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. As you know by now, this program is dedicated to empowering and inspiring you along your journey to realize more of your potential. If you want to learn more about how we can work together and learn about the Gusto Now Academy for leaders and individuals on various journeys alike, make your way to gusto-now.com and then go to the training tab, and there you will find the Academy. If you are just now joining us, my guest is Marilyn Vetter. She is the CEO of Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever. So the idea of creating that objective together like that, I think is really powerful. In fact, what I do, one of the offerings that we do at Gusto Now is, it's a visioneering, it's a joint visioneering sort of exercise where we take representatives from all of your stakeholder communities and really align them along your purpose, mission, vision, and values. So you're enrolling them in that whole thing together. So all of your leaders have already gone through this, and now you do this with your full stakeholder community, and then learn, of course, what is theirs. Now you create a shared sense of mutual purpose together. Everybody's rowing in the same direction, energized like that. And I call it your parliament of purpose. And the reason we call that exercise creating your parliament of purpose is because I'm wildly obsessed with owls. And, when we talk about a group of owls, you know where I'm going with this. You would be one person who knows. So listeners and viewers, if you don't know, you think about what do we call different groups of birds? And we have a flock of geese. We have a murder of crows, all these kinds of names. But how we talk about group of owls is they're a parliament of owls. And I like the idea of having this, sort of wisdom group that's all, nestled around your purpose, mission, vision, and values, and firing on all engines. So I wanted to celebrate what you said and take it maybe one step further. Thoughts, reactions?
Well, first of all, I love that. I love that you've used that word. For me, I love parliament as well. It's like any government institution. It's this wide array of voices that come to consensus at the end of the day, and everybody gets to own the consensus.
Yeah.
And it can be an ugly process. That's okay. That's an okay process to go through, because once you've survived it, what you will produce will be extraordinary, and you will have so much better buy-in. And people will remember the good and the bad and how they got there. And the journey will be remarkable, and it will be much more enduring because of it.
Yes, beautifully said. Okay, so for this last segment here, I want to talk about how listeners and viewers can leverage your experience of really building a culture that elevates people. I think that people talk a lot about culture, but I really don't think very many organizations or leaders really understand how to steward it really well. So I want to start with the idea first of how what you say is how culture has to be owned by everybody. I completely agree with that. In your experience, what does that actually look like in practice?
I think it's listening first. So I'll give you a good example. One of the things that when you're a nonprofit that is at the receiving end of grants, that in the past few years, we've had lots of federal freezes on dollars, and that makes those employees feel super vulnerable. And we could have said, well, that's the job that you have, and because it's a federal grant funded position, that's the risk you take. But that doesn't feel good, right? They know that is the choice. So that means they either have to leave the organization for stability, or we need to find a way to give them that sense of stability. In my mind, if you ask someone if they live and work in a good culture, they're going to say, what does that look like? It means like, I matter. They care about me.
Yeah.
So when our team came to us, said, this is untenable. It is really hard. We want to stay here, but we feel vulnerable. So we said, all right, well, let us put our thinking hats on. And our team came up with creating a PTO exchange. And so people can donate their PTO to the exchange. They can write a check to the exchange. They can do whatever that is that transitions those into dollars for the people that would be at the other end of a furlough. And so we started it in January, which meant we didn't have a lot in there. Well, then once we saw that there were going to be federal freezes, people just started dumping in their PTO. For those of us who haven't been around a long time, we wrote checks. And so every leader in the organization found ways to contribute to that PTO exchange, so that when we had 130 people that were impacted, some for a couple of days, some for a couple of months, we funded every single one of their hours to the team. And those are examples. Your words must show that you actually are going to act on them. Your intention has to marry the impact. And so that's how cultures are built, and that's how they're measured, is whether or not you walk the talk.
Completely agree. It's one thing to say we stand for this stuff. It's quite another to make the hard decisions, choices, and behave to support them in that way. That is so beautiful, what you shared about the shared PTO. That moves me to tears. It's so beautiful. Talk about feeling like you matter someplace. Wow.
Definitely.
So what I want to do is really, for pretty much the remainder of our conversation, is just let our listeners and viewers into the great work you and your team have been doing. So I know you run a group of 600 people in your organizations, and you've been there for 2.5 years. So talk us through, when you came in, what did you see? What did you recognize that you wanted to work on, what you wanted to address? And some of the early decisions and steps that you took to steward your role as a CEO.
Okay. Well, first of all, I came into an organization that the longer I'm here, the happier that I am, and the amazing amount of work that they do, but how they care about each other. And that really is remarkable. But all organizations have room for growth and improvement. And we talked about this earlier, those verticals that were established with good intentions, but because they were so entrenched, it was really hard for people that worked in conservation operations to think about, like the marketing team, for instance, like how does my work impact them? So we started to think about how can we be intentional about driving collaboration. So work plans, it's included in everybody's work plan of how do I work with others. We hired and promoted someone internally to be a director of internal communications so that people know what everyone else is doing. When
Wow.
you know what your colleagues are doing, then you get to celebrate it for one, but you also get to think like, maybe I could do that in my region, or how could I amplify those works? And then the other thing that we really did is we've always had awards in the organization, and there have not been as many team awards as we have now. And so we are awarding and recognizing, it's not big financial dollars, but team recognition of collaboration that is celebrated is really profound in how it changes people. And we make sure that our board is aware of all of those things so that they get the internal communication newsletter that goes out all the time that recognizes those moments of collaboration. They got to see the videos that we cut of the folks that won all of those awards, so that it is witnessed from the organization from the very top to all the way through all of the ranks.
Oh, that's so exciting. Okay, so a couple of things I have to say to that. So I have a dear friend and colleague in the UK named Paul Skinner, and I met him back in 2018. He wrote a book called Collaborative Advantage. And it's the whole notion of turning competitive, advantage on its head. And so we were saying before about how silos can compete. And now you're talking about how do you get your team, your various teams with different interests to collaborate. I just think that's just delightful. And you celebrate them for that. So just makes me happy. I also know, and I can't let you off the show without talking about this, Marilyn, but I know that you also spent some time working with your purpose, mission, vision, and values with your team. So tell us how you did that.
We should never assume that our mission and our vision are exactly the same as they were when this organization started 43 years ago. So we started there. Is our North Star still our North Star? And thankfully it was, which is wonderful. It's a serendipity when that happens. And the vision really of how that presents itself to the world does look the same as well. But our strategic plan changed. And more importantly, how we used and built and shared our strategic plan changed. So in the past, the strategic plan was built by the executive team. And it was run past the board, and the board obviously endorsed it. And the interesting thing is that the strategic plan didn't really change a lot. It changed somewhat. But what we did, it was almost 60 people that got to be part of that strategic planning process. So we broke it up into small chunks. So we had four priorities, and then there were objectives under each priority. We broke each one of those objectives into teams so that we had managers and directors and people at all levels that got to be part of it. So the wonderful thing is that while it didn't change wildly, it changed substantially, but not wildly, but increases the buy-in tremendously. So then, obviously you go through the normal process of the board and all of that. And once the board endorsed it, then we said, let's take this a step further. Our organization is different. We're a nonprofit, but it's also a membership organization. We have 165,000 members, 750 chapters across the United States and Canada. And so we said, we need them to know what we're working on so that they can be part of that, because they're volunteers in our work. So we did podcasts. We did blogs on it. We published it in our journals. We put it on our website so that everybody knows what that looks like. And it increased buy-in by them. And now they feel like they're not just a member, they're part of that. And that whole communication of what we are clearly doing gave so much clarity to everyone on our team and everyone around us, and just dramatically increased the buy-in. And it has just been this common drumbeat. And I think the fun part is that, so we named it Building Forever. And that has been this tether that has kept us really hyper-focused on collaboration.
Well, and that's totally the spirit of the problem and purpose. That's exactly the whole spirit of that. And I think that, it seems like you would be terribly remiss if you hadn't taken the step of involving your members. But I don't know that every organization that occurs for them, or that's where they go. So one thing I also want to put out for our listeners and viewers too, and get your perspective on this, Marilyn, is what's beautiful about the world of purpose. Purpose is one, it's always about serving beyond yourself, right? There's a self-transcendence in it. So whatever it is, whatever you're up to in your organization, you're serving somebody outside of yourself. And because the world is changing, sometimes you do need to slightly amend your purpose to be able to speak to that, to aim to that kind of thing. So in your case, you didn't have to do that. But what is powerful that I want to weave in here, in addition to what we've been talking about, is we can actually measure the experience of purpose in our organizations to make sure that it is being lived in our organization. And there's three simple measures to be able to do that. Just curious if that was part of what you were doing, or if you have been able to measure the experience of how purpose is lived in your organization.
I suppose it's probably measured in a couple of different ways. Certainly, when we do our engagement survey, we ask about that. We are actually going through the process right now with some of our team of, did we get it right? Yeah. Were we overly ambitious or not? And it's been really fun to see the results that have come back from that, and really giving them that constant voice within it. And one of the things that I think that has shifted in the organization is that for many years, at the end of the year, we would tell you what we did. Mm-hmm. And we're transitioning to an organization that says, we're telling you what we're going to do. It increases not only accountability, but a buy-in, and like, we need you to be with us in this journey. And so while I don't know that we've necessarily undertaken an assessment, I think that's actually really wise. I will tell you that just rhetorically, I've gotten lots and lots of comments from people throughout the organization of how excited they were to feel like they were part of it.
Mm-hmm. It's so delightful. There's just three simple questions that we could ask, but it have to do with the extent to which people feel like the leaders are walking the talk of the purpose, that their colleagues are living the purpose of the organization, that they feel personally aligned to the purpose. You ask those three questions, it tells you where to address things. So
and we've done that with our employees. Probably where we had the misses, we haven't done it with our members.
Ah, beautiful.
So wonderful. I like that idea.
So exciting. Well, it happens so fast, Marilyn. We're at the end of the show here. You know that this show is listened by people around the world that are trying to get better at becoming leaders themselves, to in their own organization, or even just plugging more deeply into the world of work. What would you like to leave them with?
That each of us has an impact on culture. I think it's too easy to think that you can give up on a culture. And cultures are built, yes, they are led from the top, but they are built from the inside out. And the hallmark of an exceptional team, of a high-performing team, is the team of people that cares as much about each other's success as they do their own. So own that. Be the leader in your own team, whether you lead that team or not, to reach out and to make sure that your colleagues feel like you're as invested in them as you are as yourself. And that will impact your team. People will want to be on your team. They will want to amplify your work. They're going to want to recreate your work. They're going to ask what you're doing. That is how, if you aren't at the top but want to change your culture, that's how you change a culture. You start doing it from the roots of the organization, and it will change. I've seen it happen. I've seen it in other organizations, and it's slower for sure, but it makes a meaningful difference. And at the end of the day, you for sure will feel better about your place in that organization by doing so.
What a powerful and beautiful way to close, Marilyn. I am so grateful to know you and to share with my listeners and viewers around the world. You've really made a beautiful contribution to this. Thank you so much for being on Working on Purpose.
Thank you. I really appreciate being here, and I absolutely love the fact that you're spreading this message to others who really need to hear it.
Thank you. I'm with con mucho gusto. That's exactly what we're about. So listeners and viewers, you're going to want to learn more about Marilyn Vetter and follow her work or connect with her. I highly suggest you find her on LinkedIn. She's pretty easy to find. Just type in her name. It's Marilyn, standard spelling, Vetter, V-E-T-T-E-R, Marilyn Vetter on LinkedIn. Last week, if you missed the live show, you can always catch it via recorded podcast. See you then for another nourishing and elevating conversation. Together, let's lean in and learn together how to make workplaces that work for everyone and find ways to do business in a way that betters the world. Let's work on purpose.
We hope you've enjoyed this week's program. Be sure to tune into Working on Purpose, featuring your host, Dr. Elise Cortez, each week on W4CY. Together, we'll create a world where business operates conscientiously, leadership inspires impassioned performance, and employees are fulfilled in work that provides the meaning and purpose they crave. See you there. Let's work on purpose.